Hello, my name is Easton, and today my group and I, we're going to be talking a lot about the history, impact, and future of money laundering in BC. All right, I'll kick us off here. I'll talk a little bit about the overview of the problem, which is money laundering in BC, specifically casinos. So casinos in BC, they've definitely become a big hotspot for money laundering in British Columbia just because they've handled so much money every single day in different transactions. You have money going in the casino from gamblers. You have money coming out of the casino from gamblers. You have people purchasing chips with their money and then taking the chips that they have won and depositing them to get their money back and collect their winnings. So there's a lot of different transactions going on and a lot of different money moving in and out from different ways. So with that, these high cash flow businesses, just like casinos, they're kind of like laundromats for criminals just because they have very limited anti-money laundering oversight just because of the sheer amount of money moving back and forth. And it's kind of hard to catch criminals and suspicious transactions when there's so many different transactions going on. So that's definitely a beneficial thing for the criminals here when it comes to washing their money and moving it in and out of the system. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Vancouver model. So the Vancouver model, it kind of refers how these organized crime groups, they're able to bring in their dirty money that they've earned, say, overseas or through illegal activity, use it pretty quickly for gambling, kind of seem like they're there just to have fun with their buddies maybe, and then withdraw their winnings as washed money. And even though this process makes the money can look clean, right? It originally came from very illegal activities, which could be drug trafficking, ransoms, anything that is very illegal, but they're able to pass this money through the system and make the money seem as if it's legitimate funds. And then once this money is laundered, the criminals are very good at discreetly reinvesting it back into the economy in BC. These criminal groups, they'll buy stuff like expensive real estate or vehicles or smaller businesses. And with that, it very much strengthens their own operations as it seems like, oh, these guys are just very good businessmen. They have expensive properties. They have nice cars. So they're able to wash their money in the casino and put that dirty money back into the economy and make it seem like it's clean. And they'll say, oh, I just earned this in the many businesses I own or the real estate that I own. And it'll seem as if their funding came from all stuff that they earned, which is definitely not the case. All right, moving on now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the historical context of money laundering. So before money laundering in casinos became a huge problem in BC, the government and all the regulatory bodies, they didn't really focus on preventing money laundering. They're more about increasing revenue of gambling instead of enforcing their strict measures, which I see money is definitely an important thing, but it comes at a huge cost when you have criminals funneling illegal funds through your business. There was definitely a weaker collaboration between these casinos, the regulators, and law enforcement. There was many red flags. One thing that was definitely a big touching point was the use of $20 bills. So $20 bills, they're a huge part of the drug trade. The drug traffickers, drug dealers, they use these bills as, they're not as, I guess you could say, suspicious as $100 bills. $20 bills, a lot of people have them. People have them lying around in a sense. They have them moving around. So when you have a smaller bill like that, it's very easy to kind of ignore it because it's a standard bill. They're moving back and forth between the system, and it definitely was not caught that these drug traffickers and dealers were using these bills to launder money. And for more on that, these organized crime groups, a lot of them from China, they took advantage of these gaps and they're able to actually launder hundreds of millions of dollars through the casinos every single year in BC, as they would take their money from overseas, launder them in our casinos, and then transfer this dirty money back to China where it couldn't be traced at all by our government, and their government wasn't able to see where it came from, so they got off undetected. Okay, and now I'll just touch a little bit on the mechanics of money laundering within casinos. So, money laundering in casinos, there's three stages. The first one is placement, which is where criminals, they'll bring in their dirty money, which were often in large duffel bags, which seems a little bit suspicious, of course. They'll bring them into the casinos, and a lot of the staff there, they didn't really question the duffel bags and these large transactions. They just thought, hey, I guess this guy has a lot of money and he's looking to gamble. The second stage of money laundering is the layering stage. This is where the criminals, they purchase the chips in the casino with their money, and they'll gamble, not a lot, but they'll want to appear legitimate to the staff in the casino, the security, and make their transactions look legitimate. And then after a little bit of time, they'll take out the chips for real washed cash. And another thing with that, they'll actually ask for a receipt. So they're able to have proof that they won money, in a sense, and say, no, this isn't illegal money. Here's my receipt from the casino. And finally, the last stage here is integration. And this is when the criminals take their laundered money. We talked a little bit about this earlier, and they'll reinvest it. $1 million homes, luxury cars, businesses, all this stuff is just a undercover shield for them to seem legitimate, but we all know that they have ill intentions and are just using these businesses, money, and properties as cover-ups to hide their illegal activities.
Hello, my name is Gunnar, and I will be discussing the next two sections, starting off with regulatory and institutional failures. We'll be looking at three factors that contributed to the prevalence to casino-based money laundering in British Columbia, and how it did not stem from criminal ingenuity, but rather simply exploiting a very loose framework put together by the government with poor oversight. Factor number one, conflict of interest. The British Columbia Lottery Corporation, BCLC, tasked with both operating casinos and enforcing anti-money laundering compliance, faced a fundamental conflict of interest. While as BCLC wanted to maximize profits, their own anti-money laundering task force would reduce their total revenue, causing BCLC simply just to sweep any concern under a rug. Furthermore, BCLC frequently failed to act on suspicious transactions and clashed with its technical regulator, the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch, which lacked the power and resources to intervene anything effectively. Factor number two, normalization of suspicious activity. Staff became decentralized to large, unexplained cash deliveries and often failed to escalate concerns. This environment led to the normalization of the suspicious activity. Secondly, even when suspicious transactions were filled, follow-up was rare, causing no actual concern for prosecution. Lastly, political reluctance to compromise revenue streams from high-stakes gamblers contributed to the institutional inertia. Number three, federal gaps. At the federal level, FinTrack relied on casino reporting but lacked any sort of prosecution power. And coordination and communication with agencies such as the RCMP and CRA was inconsistent, slowing investigations and allowing criminal networks to adapt. Reforms and responses. From the amount of public pressure and the dirty money reports, both of these prompted provincial and federal reforms that made them take a look at what they were doing wrong and how they can improve. At a provincial level, British Columbia introduced source of funds requirements for high-value transactions, empowering the GPEB with greater independence and oversight authority. Additionally, regulatory oversight was restructured to mitigate the conflict of interest inherent to BCLC's dual role. More power and independence were transferred to the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch, including an expanded mandate to conduct ALM audits and intervene when suspicious behavior is observed. Next, improve coordination. Interagency communication, previously described as disjointed and inefficient, was also prioritized and now seeks to have a symbiotic relationship, communicating between agencies seamlessly. Law enforcement agencies such as the RCMP's Integrated Proceeds of Crime Unit and FinTrack have now begun working more closely with provincial regulators to track the movements of illicit funds across various sectors, including real estate, auto sales, and gambling, in order to better crack down on money laundering scandals. Lastly, organized crime focus. A key recommendation from the Dirty Money Report was to treat money laundering not just as a regulatory issue, but as a serious organized crime. This led to the establishment of dedicated task force targeting transnational money laundering operations and their links to drug trafficking and underground banking networks.
Remaining challenges. So for remaining challenges, reforms have been reactive. Most policy and enforcement changes only occurred after public scandals and inquiries. For example, Peter Durman's Dirty Money reports. Prosecutions have been pretty rare. Despite clear evidence of money laundering schemes, successful prosecutions remain scarce. This limits accountability for both individuals and institutions. Systemic complacency. The normalization of suspicious activities within casinos indicates deep-rooted cultural and institutional tolerance for these types of practices. So remaining challenges continued. There's a need for political will and structural reform. True progress requires a few things: decoupling profit incentives from regulatory bodies like BCLC, strengthening law enforcement tools and interagency collaboration, embedding anti-money laundering AML priorities in political agendas, and shifting the institutional culture, which is changing the see no evil mindset within casinos and regulatory agencies, is crucial to prevent further exploitation. All right, so in conclusion, a key takeaway is BC's casino money laundering crisis shows how financial systems can be exploited when revenue generation is prioritized over integrity and oversight. Broader implications: this highlights the vulnerabilities in Canada's financial and regulatory infrastructure, and it reflects a global issue where gambling sectors serve as laundering hubs. And for the path forward, it's important to prioritize transparency, robust enforcement and accountability, and implement preventative and not just reactive measures, as well as foster a cultural shift in both government and industry to value compliance over profit. All right, so here's some more vulnerabilities continued on a chart. What the chart reveals about the system's vulnerabilities: there's unusual low LTV loans, 27%, which indicates a potential use of real estate to hide criminal funds with minimal debt. There's high-risk loans over 100% LTV, which is 15%, suggests mortgage fraud and financial manipulation to extract illicit money. And then there's a weak oversight of unregulated lenders. This enables money laundering through property with little regulatory scrutiny. And opaque ownership conceals the real owners, making it easier to launder and move criminal proceeds. All right, and the final thought: sustainable change requires aligning institutional structures, political will, and public accountability to protect financial systems from criminal misuse. Thank you.